Joel Klatt is with us, and he joins us each week courtesy of MyBookie.ag. Code next round to double your deposit bonus up to $1,000. MyBookie.ag. What is up, Klatt? How are you? You're muted, or we don't have him on. One of the two.
Could be on our end.
Could be on our end. You look good, though. Klatt looks good. Yeah. That's a good looking shot.
That plant is growing well in the back.
The plant is that. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah. How are you? How are you, Klatt?
Yeah, you just got all sorts of technical issues here this morning. How are you guys? What's going on?
Not a whole lot, man. I mean, we're going to get to Bama, Tennessee with you, obviously, but I watched your game as much as I could. I mean, Michigan they beat them senseless. That was such an impressive game by Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, it was. It's almost to the point, and you guys will know, like, they almost beat them too soundly. Yeah. Where everyone's like, well, Penn State was clearly not very good. So there's going to be a little of that. Penn State came into that game with the 5th-ranked rushing defense in the country, and they just absolutely demolished them up front. That was their game plan going in. I talked to them about it on Friday, and they said they didn't feel like Penn State could hang with them in the interior. They have a real confidence about this offensive line. They tell me that, and by the way, I concur. It's not just what they tell me. What I see in the last 4 weeks, that is a better offensive line than they had a year ago. I think it's a more dynamic run game. And Corum is playing really well, Blake Corum. So I think Michigan, even without Hutchinson and Ajabo, I think that they're better than they were a year ago. Coming down the stretch run, that's exciting because I think Ohio State's better than they were a year ago. So that makes that division very interesting, obviously, coming down the closing stretch.
Yeah, it's almost like Michigan's becoming the new Wisconsin, if that makes any sense. It doesn't matter who's in that backfield; they're putting up numbers. I know Corum was really good last year, but Haskins was there. Get the other kid, Donovan Edwards, has a big game on Saturday. So it seems like that it's all about running the football. But J.J. McCarthy, how's he playing right now?
Well, I think that's a question because the numbers suggest that he's playing really well, and to a large degree he is. Here's what we haven't seen. So, like on my podcast that came out today, I talked all about a bunch of these games from this last weekend. That was the only game that a quarterback didn't have to be amazing to win. Right. And here are the games I talked about. TCU, I thought Max Duggan was incredible, right? Like he was fantastic in that game against Oklahoma State. I know not many people watched that one because of the time it was on. I was flipping back and forth in the plane. Obviously, we know what Hendon did, and Hooker and Bryce Young, by the way, even in a loss, they were unbelievable. The team in a large degree on each of their backs. Same in the nightcap, Cameron Rising. Caleb Williams, unbelievable quarterback performances. We've seen Stroud be able to do that. That's the unknown with Michigan. I think you bring up an excellent question. We don't know if they've got a quarterback that can go to that level when needed. And I don't know if we're going to know that until Ohio State, to be quite honest with you. Maybe against Illinois. I think Illinois is a better defense than we maybe think at this point. But that was what was missing last year, right? When they got into a game when it's like, okay, we're overmatched. Now we need our quarterback against Georgia to just be out of this world. Like they didn't have that. And so they think they have that with J.J. McCarthy, but your question is 100% accurate. We don't know.
Hats off on your broadcast. I was in Knoxville, but I record everything and I go back and watch. I love the high view of the blocking that you guys showed for Michigan, and you made the point that this offensive line may actually be better than last year's offensive line at Michigan. Talk a little bit more about that. Why do you feel like, because didn't they win that big stupid looking award that they give to offensive linemen,
the Joe
piano?
Moore Award?
Piano.
Yeah,
piano.
They won the Joe Moore Award last year, best offensive line in the country, and then Jordan Davis was like, "Hold my beer." So I think they are better. If you unpack that a little bit, last year they diversified their run schematics. So in 2020, which was horrendous, 19 and 18, and really since Josh Gaddis had gotten there as the offensive coordinator, they wanted to be a spread zone RPO team. And it didn't really fit Harbaugh's history, right? I mean, we know what his history was, whether it was the 49ers or Stanford, it was extra tight ends, extra offensive linemen, and running what I call like gap, power, and man schemes. Okay, those are just very different types of schemes. And last year, they finally decided, like, listen, we're going to do both, and we're going to be really good at both. And for the most part, they were able to achieve that. And they had a very good veteran offensive line. Then they needed to replace their center. And they didn't feel like they had a great option in the program. And here comes this kid from Virginia, Olu Oluwatimi, who was a Remington finalist, another one of those awards you guys were just talking about, as the best center in the country last year from Virginia. And he's come in and made them even better. He's more physical. He's more athletic. And when you've got that as the tip of the spear at your center, then you can be really good. For example, Penn State was trying as best they could to load an extra hat into the box, right? An extra player into the run box. But the bottom line is that they were so dominant moving the double team back to the linebackers that even the extra hat was basically blocked. And in a large degree, it was because of that center. I think that they're more athletic, they're more powerful, and that diversification of their run game has really helped them.
Joel Klatt is with us, Fox Sports. The big noon kickoff this week is Iowa at Ohio State, 11 o'clock, Fox 6 locally for the big noon kickoff. Klatt, I wasn't going to say anything, Klatt, but your reaction, I mean,
I didn't say anything either, to be fair.
It was a 30-point beat down on that one. Klatt with us, courtesy of MyBookie.ag, code next.
Because, I don't want to go call UCLA Oregon.
Yeah. By the way, you guys had a great schedule in 2021. You really did.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I can't complain.
Yeah.
I can't complain.
I mean, it is 2022 now, but
that's true. But
I think that you're right. We're going to have a nice finish to the year. We're going to have Penn State, Ohio State.
That's good.
Which who knows if that's going to be a good game.
Yeah.
I think we are going to come out of the big noon window and do USC, UCLA. And then obviously Michigan, Ohio State. So.
All right, Klatt with us, courtesy of MyBookie.ag. Use code next round to double your
Bama
initial
must have
deposit.
lost. We haven't gotten to a Bama question at all. Right?
Tough to play on the road in the SEC.
Tough to play on the road in the SEC.
Right? Oh, my gosh.
I mean, really,
those road games.
I would have moved them up, I think.
Yeah, just
in
for that
atmosphere.
performance. MyBookie.ag. Use code next round to double your initial deposit bonus up to $1,000.
Bama. Jesus, and then everybody else.
You're getting it, man. Yeah. You could be on the CBS one day. Oh,
there we go.
There you go.
So Alabama, I mean, it was almost with way more points, an instant replay of what you saw in Austin. Alabama goes on the road. They forget how to play defense in the secondary, and they commit 1 billion penalties. I mean, with more points, it was an instant replay of what you saw in Austin.
Yeah, it was. And I think that's the most alarming part, at least for me, about Alabama, is the penalties. That I never expect that for a team that has such a sense of urgency, that has such a focus of doing your job and doing it the right way. The penalties, in particular in Austin and then now in Knoxville, are striking. There's no doubt. I will say though, like, I don't think the sky is falling at all for Alabama. Alabama's fine, guys. Like, I get it. There's some things to work on. There's no doubt about that. Are they great on the road in the last couple of years? Not really, right? I think that we all can kind of agree on that. I believe the reason that they're not as dominant on the road as what they have been in the past is because it's really hard to win I'm kidding. Is because they're not as dominant up front on the offensive line. That doesn't mean that they can't and don't run the ball effectively, and they do. I just don't think that they're as dominant up there as what they have been in the past. Having said that, I mean, this is the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first time that they've lost a regular season non-division game since like 2010, I want to say. I think it was like
that sounds right. South Carolina,
yeah, all the way back then.
Yeah.
But I bring that up to just say, like, they're fine in their division, guys. Like, do we really think Ole Miss has a quarterback like Quinn Ewers in the first quarter of that game, or like Hendon Hooker last week? Because that's what it takes, right? I mean, like, Bama still beat Texas. Bama had every opportunity to win that game, and the ball bounces a couple of different ways, and they do win that game in Knoxville in an unbelievable environment, by the way. So do we really think that like Ole Miss and Jackson Dart are going to do the same thing to Alabama? I don't, personally. I think Bama is going to be just fine. I think they're going to be right back there in the SEC championship game, which means as great as that victory was for Tennessee, and as great as it was for an individual like Hendon Hooker, and it was, you know, I think the best thing that came from it is it just put them in position to now have to go 2-0 against Georgia and Athens, and then Alabama in the SEC championship game in order to win a title. That's really difficult to do, and I don't believe they can do it. So this is not, you know, Tennessee hate. That was unbelievable. They've got, at least in my estimation, one of the top 2 offenses in all of college football. Hendon Hooker has put himself firmly in that lead conversation for the Heisman Trophy. There's nothing more that you can do. Josh Heupel has done amazing things, but the fact remains they have the 129th ranked pass defense in college football, the 104th ranked total defense in college football, and we've seen this blueprint before. Ask Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts what it's like trying to drag a team with just an offense across the finish line, right? So as great as this game was for Tennessee, and it was, and as disappointed as Bama fans must be, and I'm sure they are, Bama's going to be just fine. They're going to be in Atlanta. I still think they're going to face Georgia in that game, which might be a better matchup for them, because then they don't have to look across and see a quarterback that can take advantage of where they have struggled at times this year.
I want to take you back to the offensive line for Alabama and just the change in philosophy for Nick Saban. It's 1st and 10 on the Tennessee 32-yard line, and they pass the ball 3 times instead of making Tennessee call timeouts or milking the clock anymore. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you have to admit that's a change in philosophy from Nick Saban in 2011 and 2012.
I was surprised, but I think that I was more surprised only with and maybe in the moment. I was watching, and in the moment I didn't really think of it, and then after the series I was like, man, they threw it 3 times. You know, because in the moment their best player is Bryce. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, like that felt like the Texas game to me. Play poorly, penalties, and then all of a sudden, when you need it most, he drives down the field and you kick a field goal. The only difficult part was the clock, and I think that for Saban, I think he knew he wanted and needed more yardage, which he ended up needing because they ended up missing the field goal anyways, right? So I think it was more about the yardage than it was the clock for him. If they would have been closer, maybe you see a run play, right? If it's not at the 32, let's just, like, for sake of argument, let's say the ball's at the 18. Maybe you see a run play at that point, because he feels like he's got a better probability of making the field goal, and he can take it down inside of 10 seconds and then kick it. So maybe that has something to do with it. But in all reality, this team, and we saw it the previous week, I'm talking all over the place, but that's without Bryce Young, like, A&M almost beat him, and A&M's no good at all.
In year 2, who do you think has been more surprising, Brett Bielema at Illinois or what Josh Heupel's done at Tennessee?
Man.
And can you imagine if you had Illinois' defense with Tennessee's offense?
Right. I mean, you'd have a national title contender, right? I mean, you'd have the number 1 team in the country, right? Like, I definitely would have put Tennessee up there. I just couldn't in good conscience put them up there with what we know about their defense. More surprising is, I mean, man, that's a tough one. I feel like I'm minimizing one of the two if I give you an answer. They're both surprising and they're both incredible. I'm going to lean Bielema because Illinois was awful, right? Like, just awful. And at least at Tennessee, you've seen some pockets here and there, and they, at least on the recruiting trail over the last few years, have gotten decent players. They've obviously gotten great players in the transfer portal. So I'll lean Bielema on that one, because Bielema, what they're doing, that defense is really good. I mean, really good. Chase Brown is a heck of a player. They gave him the rock 41 times. Can you imagine
That's
what
crazy.
you would feel like if you had to carry the ball 41 times in a college football game?
That's old school. That's old school. Listen, I know it's an SEC question for you here, and it's going to shock you, but I don't think Michigan loses or Ohio State loses until they play each other. More likely, 2 Big Ten teams in the college football playoffs or 2 SEC teams in the college football playoffs?
2 SEC teams, because I think those 2 would likely be playing in their conference championship game, rather than in the Big Ten's case, meeting in the regular season and then one of them not having that quote 13th data point. I think it's easier when you see a game like you see last year in the SEC championship game, and you see Bama win over like an undefeated Georgia, and they go.
But 17, Alabama got in after losing the Iron Bowl without having to play in that SEC title game.
That's true. And Ohio State has gone as a non-division winner as well when Penn State ended up winning the Big Ten, if you remember that year.
Yep.
And Ohio State went and got thumped, by the way, in that game in the playoff, if my memory serves correct. So I think it's a great question. I think a lot of that depends on how Tennessee finishes the year, right? So if Tennessee's only loss is to Georgia, and then Bama beats Georgia, Bama and Georgia are going, period, right? Like, for sure. Then the question becomes, is it Ohio State that wins the Big Ten? And then what's the argument with Michigan and everybody else? It's likely Clemson in my mind, right? So at that point, I just think it's more likely that the SEC would get 2 in.
He is Joel Klatt. SEC gets 2 in. The final thing we're going to hear from Klatt today.
Hey, Arkansas did have it rough on the road this week.
Yeah,
they had
BYU.
to travel.
Oh, yeah, but they got to go outside the SEC, so it was a layup.
Yeah.
Guys,
We can let this go.
We can't let it go. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
It
right?
is.
I mean, it's like the whole year.
Hey,
it's amazing.
You know who's going to feel a tough road trip is Iowa. They're at Ohio State Saturday. Big new kick.
Kansas State TCU seems like a fun game for you.
Yeah, that's a Fox game.
I know that.
Let's
Guys, trust me, I'm well aware. It's like the 3rd week this year that we have like the 3rd best game in the Fox family of networks.
What is which game is Brock getting? Is Brock getting UCLA Oregon?
I think Brock's going to Oregon.
All right, so is that
he probably should send me a gift basket because I'm locked into this noon slot. That's all right. I mean, listen, it gets here's what's crazy. So last week, really quickly, we did Michigan, Indiana, the same week that game days at TCU, Kansas. Everyone's looking at TCU, Kansas. That game does 1.2 million. Our game with Michigan, Indiana does over 4 million viewers.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's a business, and it's just like my kids just drove out to private school, for God's sakes. I got to pay for that somehow.
Is Brando? I mean, is that a Brando game? Kansas State at TCU?
It might be.
Oh, wow. Jeez. All right, so big noon kick. Iowa at Ohio State, 11 o'clock, Fox 6 here locally is where you see Klatt. He is presented each week by My Bookie. Joel, it is always fun, man. We appreciate the time.
Guys, pleasure's always on this side of the table.
Absolutely. Absolutely, brother.
By the way, eyebrow reaction to is that a Brando game, not lost on me, Klatt. The eyebrows set it off.
What are you talking about?
He was not on camera. Those are my eyebrows.
Yeah.
Camera, yeah, it was a camera freeze.
Yes, that was it. Thank you, Klatt. Have a good week, buddy. We'll see you. Joel Klatt with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. He appears courtesy of MyBookie.ag. Your favorite athletes always strive to put themselves in winning positions. You could do the same with MyBookie.ag. Sign up now. MyBookie.ag, code NEXTROUND. Claim your deposit match of any amount up to $1,000. They'll match it up to $1,000. MyBookie.ag, code NEXTROUND. That is code NEXTROUND. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere. MyBookie.ag, code NEXTROUND to claim that double deposit bonus.